Good evening, everyone. I'm Kurt Dietrich, Superintendent of Schools in the North Penn School District. It's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to the Understanding Assessments Community Forum. Also welcome those who are watching at home through our cable television station. We do have a program planned this evening where we will be discussing assessments, and the format we're using this evening will be some prepared slides that I will be walking us through, and then we'll have a panel who will be answering questions from the audience. And also, if you're watching at home and you'd like to be able to send us questions, please do so, because we will also take questions from those who are watching at home. On the panel this evening, we do have Tony Butts, our Manager of Curriculum. I think she's detained right now in another matter, but she'll be here shortly. Diane Holben, our Assistant Superintendent. Deb McKay, our Director of Secondary Education. Cheryl McHugh, our Director of Elementary Education. Jenna Rufo, our Manager of Special Education, and Betty Santoro, our Director of Special Education. The purposes of assessment, we put together this slide so it would be clear to everyone, why do we have these assessments? And there are various reasons, and they serve various purposes. Identifying individual student strengths and needs would be an initial and important purpose of assessments. Identifying grade level strengths and needs when we look at things in the aggregate is important to us. Monitoring student mastery of key concepts and essential skills. And what we look at there is what is in short-term memory and what is in long-term memory, with the goal, of course, to get everything into long-term memory. A measure of short-term memory may be an initial quick quiz. A measure of long-term memory may be a final exam. Monitoring progress and growth, both are very important, progress and growth in student achievement, and we'll talk some more about the importance of growth and how things are evolving in the state of Pennsylvania, measuring growth and valuing growth. And very importantly, communicating both progress and mastery to our students, to our parents, to colleges, to potential employers. In North Penn, we do have a balanced assessment system. The basic types of assessment are summative, benchmark assessments, and formative assessments. And all types are necessary for us to gain a full picture of student achievement. Some examples of summative assessments. Summative assessments would be those that measure mastery of a topic, and they're frequently against state standards. So if a state standard is written that students shall be able to know and be able to do a certain kind of a thing, a summative assessment would measure whether they can do that. They occur at the end of instruction, often once a year. Examples would be the PSSA, the Keystone exams, midterm exams, final exams, all summative assessments. Let's talk a little bit about the PSSA. Things are changing with the state and with the assessment program. The PSSA is grade specific, and there is a movement that will align our PSSA to the PA core standards beginning next year. You'll recall, if you've been following this in the news, that the group of governors, for example, had met and determined that there's some common core standards that all students should be able to attain. And Pennsylvania adopted a version very close to the Common Core, but they're called the PA Core standards. That means that the PSSA needs to be realigned to the new expectations, the PA Core standards. PSSAs are required in grades 3 through 8 for reading and math, in grades 4 and 8 for science, and presently in grades 5 and 8 for writing. Beginning next year, the reading and writing tests will be collapsed into one English Language Arts, or ELA, assessment. Also, you need to know that the level of rigor will increase with the new PSSAs that are aligned to the PA core standards. Expect less recall, more application, and more synthesis of information. Also, you will have text-dependent analysis responses, which require more analysis of the text than do the current open-ended questions. So text dependent is just what the name implies. The response is dependent on a text that you read first, and then you respond to that text that you just read and analyzed. Keystone exams. Keystones are course-specific, they're aligned to PA core standards, and they're required for graduation beginning with the class of 2017. That's really significant. Pennsylvania has moved to requiring students to demonstrate mastery on a statewide exam in order to graduate. In the past, we had the PSSA, and the expectation was students would demonstrate mastery in the PSSA. However, it was not an ultimate requirement for graduation in that school districts were able to use their local graduation requirements and expectations, and if those were aligned to state standards and they were able to demonstrate mastery on the local courses, then they still graduated. That has changed, and now Keystones are required to be able to graduate. They're required presently in Algebra 1, in biology, and English literature. There's a lot of discussion about expanding the requirements beyond Algebra 1, biology, and English literature, and we'll see what happens in the legislature with funding for that proposal. Exams are administered at the end of Algebra 1 in our school district, in biology 10, and in English 10. And those are administered in lieu of a final exam in North Penn. As I said earlier, students must be proficient on all three exams in order to earn a diploma. If they're not proficient, they will receive supplemental instruction and retake the exam. And then very importantly, for those students who do not score at a proficient level after multiple attempts, those students would be eligible to complete state-developed, state-scored, project-based assessments to demonstrate proficiency. The Pennsylvania Value-Added Assessment System is something that's also relatively new in the area of assessment in Pennsylvania. They've had value-added assessment systems in some other states, namely Tennessee, for example, is one of the front runners in value-added assessment. It is now in Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania Value-Added Assessment System uses PSSA and Keystone results to measure student growth in achievement. So not only are we interested in seeing whether or not students have mastered and are proficient, but we're interested in seeing what level of growth students are experiencing with their achievement. And that's growth across all students, not just students in a certain subset. All students and their growth is measured through PVAS, or the Pennsylvania Value-Added Assessment System. To be able to do that, they compare student scores across the years to determine whether a student has made at least a year's worth of growth in a year's time. It does allow schools to see the trend in student achievement rather than simply a snapshot from 1 year. And here's a quick graph. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it does show the state percentile on the vertical axes, and then on the horizontal axes you see 2010 PSSAs in the spring of 2011, PSSAs in the spring for grade 4 for this particular student, 2012 in grade 5, and 2013 the student would be in grade 6. And it plots the ranking of that student's achievement according to the state percentile. And you can see, for example, there's some of those lines that are going up significantly, and that would be more than a year's worth of growth. If you have a flat kind of a line, you have exactly a year's worth of growth, and if the line is trending downward, you would have less than a year's worth of growth. Benchmark assessments. You may have heard from your children or from your child's teachers about benchmark assessments. They are aligned to the standards that are assessed in a summative assessment. They are given at multiple intervals during the year to measure mastery of skills and concepts and/or the growth in achievement, and they are used to determine whether students need additional instruction or enrichment on particular skills and concepts. And we have some examples listed. The Foresight Mathematics would be a benchmark assessment. DIBELS would be a benchmark assessment. The grade test would be a benchmark assessment. Again, aligned standards, they're given at multiple intervals, and we're seeing if we're having appropriate growth and if they're on a trajectory to be able to reach proficiency. Let's look a little more carefully at the Foresight Mathematics. The Foresight Mathematics test is aligned to Pennsylvania state standards. It will be realigned to the Pennsylvania core standards. Recall early in my presentation I talked about the PA core standards being a version of the Common Core standards that we have here in Pennsylvania. They are given in grades 3 to 8 twice a year. They're given in the fall and in the winter. As I said earlier, a trajectory test measures progress towards attaining the end of the year mastery of grade level skills. That means that you may see something in the beginning of the year where the student has not yet necessarily been exposed to that particular skill or instruction. However, it is what the student needs to master by the end of the year, perhaps by the second test they have, and certainly by the third test, then the expectation they would have mastered that content. It does provide an overall proficiency level as well as scores on specific skill groups, so you get feedback on, for example, numbers and operations, measurement, geometry, algebraic functions, data analysis, when you have the Foresight Mathematics benchmark test. DIBELS. DIBELS should be a word or acronym that is familiar to you if you have a child in the elementary schools. DIBELS stands for Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. DIBELS are given to grades K to 6, 3 times a year, the fall, the winter, the spring. There's a score that's needed to be proficient, and it increases each time the assessment is given, which would then reflect the expectations for student growth. The DIBELS test does measure student mastery and growth in decoding skills, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. We use DIBELS as a screening tool to identify student understanding and application of literacy skills, and the results are used to be responsive to student needs. We adjust our instruction according to results that we got from the DIBELS testing so that we can ensure appropriate student growth in those specific reading skills. You may be familiar with the DIBELS assessment as a part of our RTII program, and the teachers do meet and discuss what the needs are of the students and group accordingly. The grade test. GRADE stands for Group Reading and Diagnostic Evaluation. It's given in grades 3 to 8 to all students. It's given in grades 9 to 12 for the reading intervention students. It's given 3 times a year. The raw score that's needed to be proficient does increase from fall to spring. It does measure student mastery and growth in achievement on vocabulary, sentence comprehension, passage comprehension, listening comprehension skills. And all of those components are a part of the overall reading comprehension. We do use the results of the grade to identify areas of student strength and need, as well as adjust instruction, to be able to ensure that students are appropriately growing in their reading achievement. Let's take a look at formative assessments. We talked about some summative, we talked about some benchmark. Let's take a look at formative assessments. Formative assessments generally are curriculum-based assessments that align with a particular course or a subject. They're district designed to align with that course or subject. Teachers are involved with writing formative assessments. They can be very structured, they can be informal. An example of an informal formative assessment may be when the teacher in the course of instruction may be questioning the class right at that moment in time to see if they're picking up on the concept. Something structured may be a quiz or perhaps might be an end-of-unit test. So in a sense, it's taking the temperature to see if students are understanding the instruction. Formative assessments are administered as a part of instruction so that we can monitor progress and so that we can provide real-time adjustments to instruction. So as a teacher, when you're giving a formative assessment, you're trying to determine if students are mastering the content or if you have to provide additional explanation or perhaps a different way of explaining the concept. An important part of all of this is cumulative questioning, and I'll have a slide or two about cumulative questioning, but we're looking for cumulative questions or flashback questions, some people call them, to make sure that students are retaining concepts and skills. Teachers do use the results of formative assessments in their lesson planning, and that helps them determine the needs for enrichment or intervention. Now, I mentioned cumulative testing. This ties into the instructional sequence for the mastery of essential content. And let me tell you a little quick story about this. When I was a classroom teacher, I taught chemistry and biology. And I had a student, I'll give you her first name, and if she's watching at home or she's in the audience, I'm glad to know you're all grown up now and perhaps you have your own children. But I had a student, Nikki. Nikki had she had a study hall right before my class. I was teaching chemistry and she had study hall before my class. And she knew that when we had an announced test, that she should be studying for this test. And Nikki was the kind of person who would, in her study hall right before my test, try to quickly memorize in short-term memory as much as possible. And when she came to my class on test day, she didn't want anybody to talk to her. So if I started talking, hello, Nikki, how are you? How was whatever, your weekend, whatever. She didn't want to hear that because she had a need to quickly sit down and spit it back as quickly as possible before she forgot it. Now, when Nikki did that, Nikki was giving us a false positive on whether or not she understood that material, because she was just spitting it back to me very quickly, and it really wasn't in long-term memory at all. And if I talked to Nikki an hour later, or 2 hours later, or a day later, or a week later, it was unlikely she could remember as much as she was trying to remember immediately when she was ready to sit for my test. So what we're trying to do with the instructional sequence for mastery of essential content is really to measure long-term memory. What do students have in their long-term memory? It's retained, it's ready to use again the next time they take another course in this area, a course that builds upon the one that they're taking at the time, maybe an end of course kind of test like a Keystone, or perhaps if they sit for an SAT. What's in their long-term memory? And the sequence that I've identified here and that we use in North Penn, and your children should be talking to you about, their teachers doing this, is the teacher does identify and does teach the standards-based essential content. So they would make very clear this is essential content when they're teaching it. You must know it. You will see it again. Students receive a list of learner objectives for the mastery of the content, so there are no secrets here. The teacher administers the first assessment and then reviews the results with the students to identify learning gaps. Often what happens, unless you have 100%, when you get that test back, you have an 80%, you're feeling okay about it, it's a B minus perhaps. But you still have 20% you haven't yet mastered. And if it's 20% of that you haven't mastered and it's essential content, and it's something that you need to know because the course builds upon that, you have a problem. You have to learn that. So the next bullet there is the students engage in remediation of essential content. You cannot continue in the course unless you remediate and learn that essential content, because it will come back and be a problem for you later in the course when the expectation is that you've mastered that initial content that you had earlier in the course. And then, in the last bullet on this slide, the teacher asks cumulative essential content questions on subsequent assessments. The expectation there is that not only are you studying a couple days, a night, whatever it is before the test, of the current unit's material, but you're also studying essential content that you need to know from earlier in the course. The teacher makes it clear, this is essential content, you will see it again. We expect you to get this into your long-term memory, so we will see some flashback questions on this. And each time they use that and study it again, you increase the likelihood that it goes into long-term memory. And there's been some research done, for example, on learning vocabulary words. Bob Marzano does a lot of research, and Mr. Marzano, or Dr. Marzano, I'm sure, Dr. Marzano has identified in his research that somebody needs to use a vocabulary term 18 times before they have it into long-term memory. So if you're learning vocabulary words and you're trying to learn a discrete list of vocabulary words and you expect that you can look at it once or twice and it'll be in your long-term memory, you're the exception. Most people need to use a term according to Dr. Marzano's research, 18 times to get it into their long-term memory. So building on that concept and having cumulative questions, flashback questions, if you will, helps students to build long-term memory. So continuing in this instructional sequence, then at the end of each unit, a unit assessment is administered. Cumulative questions are included in that assessment. The teacher repeats the process of identifying learning gaps with the students, because what I said earlier is important. You need to be able to learn that essential content because you will build upon it as the course continues. The teacher does item analysis. That's very helpful for the teacher to determine where as a class there might be struggling learners and determine whether or not as a class there needs to be reteaching, or if it's only a few isolated students, it can be done in the extra help periods, or the student can do it on her own or his own time. If necessary, there's remediation to the student. The next bullet in there, teachers do reflect on the instructional strategies. They make adjustments in their instruction. So the data is informing their instruction. When they teach that concept again, perhaps even within that same year, they might make some adjustments, certainly when they teach it again in subsequent years. And this process is continued until the student has attained mastery of the standards-based essential content. So it should be pretty clear, the state has identified PA core standards. They're telling us what students need to know and be able to do to pass those tests. We have a curriculum that's aligned to those tests. We made it very clear to the students what they need to know and be able to do in order to be successful on that state test. So the mystery should be out of it. There shouldn't be any mystery here. You know what you have to do to be able to show proficiency on that state exam. And it'll be taught during the course of the year. We'll ask you to study stuff repeatedly, not just the night before the test, so that you actually do get it in your long-term memory. We'll ask you to engage in remediation if there's something you don't understand. All right, assessment and RTII. I mentioned earlier our RTII process, the response to instruction and intervention. We put up a quick slide here on a benchmark assessment like the DIBELS would be given, and then perhaps the results of that might indicate that there needs to be another diagnostic assessment that would identify a specific need. So the DIBELS might have uncovered something, but it doesn't give you enough information. The diagnostic test would be administered like a running record or something like that. And then finally, there's some targeted instruction to address the identified need during the STAR time. That's the time when we regroup and we have students in specific groups as a part of our RTII process. And there's progress monitoring that goes on to make sure the student now has demonstrated that mastery. We do use multiple criteria for placement. So when you're evaluating an academic placement for a student, you don't want to only consider one item, you want to be able to consider multiple criteria. So you might look at the unit test averages, you might look at PSSA scores, keystone exams, the results of your midterms, your final exams, the results of benchmark assessment results. Those are all criteria that might come into play when looking at an appropriate placement for a student. Just another comment about that. I was just meeting today with some middle school students at one of our middle schools, and I was underscoring the importance of being challenged in your coursework and taking the most rigorous coursework that you can handle. We do want to have students feeling well prepared then to be able to take the most rigorous coursework for which they're capable of taking. But they would look at results of various factors to determine what courses they ought to be taking for the next year. Now, we also, as I mentioned earlier, use assessment results for continuous improvement at the district level. So we're trying to improve not just in the achievement of our individual students, but also as a district and on the school level. So the district and schools do review multiple assessment data sets to determine areas of strength and opportunities for improvement. We do determine root causes. We want to look at why the assessment results are pointing to certain strengths or concerns. We do develop school goals and strategies for addressing the opportunities for improvement, which align to these root causes. And then we monitor assessment data to determine whether strategies are improving achievement. So you might have heard earlier in the year here about the school performance profile. That is a new tool that the state is using to give feedback to schools As a part of the school performance profile, there would be areas for improvement that the principal and the teachers have identified with the assistance of the central office staff. They would develop school goals and strategies to be able to address those areas that have their opportunities for improvement after they've looked at the root causes. So we get down pretty deep into the data. And then finally, I have a slide here because I think this is really important, and that's, despite all this discussion about assessment, school performance is more than just assessment results. Mastery of grade level content, Keystone Proficiency, PSSA Proficiency, they're all extremely important, but so is developing a well-rounded, diverse individual, so we always want to underscore the need to take a wide variety of courses, programs, clubs, participate in athletics. They're all different ways to be able to develop lifelong interests and skills. It goes well beyond simply assessment results. We have award-winning, for example, string ensembles. The academic decathlon team, again, has won the state championship. They'll be competing at nationals again. All kinds of great things happening in our schools that go beyond simply assessment results. We are now ready for questions, and as I said earlier, we'll take questions from the audience. The panel will answer those questions. I will moderate, so if you have a question, please raise your hand. I will come back to you with the microphone, hand you the microphone. You can ask the question. I'll take the microphone back from you then, and I will direct it to a panel member who might be able to answer that question. So why don't we get started now with questions also. If you have questions and you're watching at home and want to send those questions in, please do so. Okay, who wants to start with the first question? I see two hands immediately, and I'll start with the person closest to me, and then I'll come back to the one back there.
Yes. Dr. Dietrich, I was listening to this, the one or two slides back. I was thinking about the learning gaps, and it seems to be a lot of work for a teacher to evaluate all the students and these learning gaps. And I guess my question really is centered to Tony. You handle the e-learning. So how is e-learning going to be integrated in this to help the teacher, if at all, if it can be?
Okay, Tony, and then other members of the panel, you want to just talk about the use of technology and how we can use all the tools that are available to us in technology to be helpful.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that e-learning supports when it comes to differentiated instruction and a teacher being able to develop individual pathways of learning for each child is that the whole idea of e-learning gives just-in-time information with assessment data. So as a teacher, you could have students take a quiz or take a test and be able to, through the use of computer technology, and be able to determine what their strengths and their weaknesses are. So e-learning provides that particular tool to support that. That can be done without the e-learning platform, but it definitely supports the teacher by giving them that particular tool to do it in a more, I think, streamlined manner. I'm actually going to defer a little bit of this to Cheryl McHugh, our Director of Elementary Education. She has done a lot of work with e-learning platforms and, in fact, spearheads our committee with e-learning.
Thank you, Tony. Mr. O'Donnell, absolutely correct. It is a great way for us to be able to utilize some pre- and post-test design to assess what our students know coming in prior to instruction, and then in a very methodical way, target the instruction that's needed for individual students, which allows then for what Dr. Butz indicated as that differentiation component. And yes, it can happen without technology. It happens most readily with technology and has that ease and just in time as Dr. Butz indicated. So what we're doing is really identifying the strengths and the need areas for our students and then approaching the instruction from a base that is closely tied and aligned to the PA core standards, which is what many of the e-learning platforms that the district has been investigating are really touting, and they're published and created around having that close alignment to the PA standards, which eventually is what our students will see on each and every one of the assessments that they take. because those are kind of our marching orders, and that's the curriculum by which we need to be assessing our students and teaching them.
Okay. Thank you, panel. I saw a hand back here.
Hi there. First, I want to say, in preface to all of this, I believe we have a strong district. I've said this many times in different forums, but we have a very strong district. That said, I'm concerned about the direction all of this assessment and testing is going, is directing what's going on in the classroom. I didn't prepare my thoughts, so they're a little scattered. So Dr. Dietrich mentioned earlier about our goal is to take our short-term memory learning and transfer it to our long-term memory learning. And that students are being told these are things you're going to need to know. This is what you need to know. I'm going to tell you as a parent, there's a lot of stress that our kids are getting more and more exposed to. I have young kids. I have bright kids. They are studying for this PSSA. They are practicing for the PSSA. They are taking home packets to practice. They are bright. They are smart. They've done well. They are stressed. We are strong as a district, and I know there are pockets where we need to be assessing all of this. Our kids don't need to know all of this background stuff. They are receiving it. They are absorbing it. They are stressed. When you are stressed, that transfer doesn't occur. It doesn't occur well. It doesn't occur strongly. And as a parent, I need you all to know this. And as representatives of our district who are leading this district, I need you to be aware of it. I need you to address it. I need you to make sure that the stress levels of our kids are taken care of in more than just a party before PSSAs. The long-term stress of preparing for these exams throughout the year is affecting our kids, and I'd like you to address that, please.
Okay, do we have a panel member who wants to talk about the state accountability movement, the stress that students feel, and the preparedness of students to be able to handle the stresses of the accountability movement that we're in right now in education? Dr. Holben?
I can at least start. And I understand what you're sharing. I think we all strive to have a balance. The state and the federal government have given us some expectations in terms of student assessment. We don't have the ability to say that we're not going to do it. So PSSAs, Keystones, access testing for ESL students are a reality for us. That being said, I think the way we look at things like benchmark assessments is really the opportunity to kind of take the temperature at points during the year and say, do the students look like they're on track? Do they look like they're moving toward being able to master in a year what that we would expect them to master? The purpose of a benchmark assessment really is not to study for it, to beat the test, so to speak. It's really just to say, okay, where are you at now so that we can plan accordingly going forward? I think, and Tony can certainly, or Cheryl or Deb can certainly speak to this as well. None of us want students to be stressed, certainly. You know, none of us want students to spend their time worrying about tests. And I think as we've been going through the curriculum review cycle and looking at curriculum revision to align with the PA Core standards, the hope is that students will be gaining those skills throughout the year. Students will be building those skills, as Dr. Dietrich said, in a cumulative fashion, so that there isn't a need to be cramming right before the test. There isn't a need to be providing a lot of test prep, because those skills would have been built in a more cumulative manner. So that's the direction I think that we're heading, in the direction where we'd like to be. I won't sit here and say we're perfectly there yet, but that's the direction that we're striving for. And I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that.
Sure, I'd like to add to that. I can certainly agree with what Dr. Holborn was sharing in terms of really wanting to work with our students so that they're not, like you shared it, stressed out, because it is a phenomenon that's occurring not only here in North Penn, it's really occurring in all schools because of the nature of the accountability. And I agree that we're moving in the direction that we want to work with our teachers, who ultimately work with our students to try to reduce the levels of stress in the classroom. And also, as we are working through the curriculum renewal process, as was mentioned, that it's the PSSA strategies and standards are embedded in the curriculum on what the students are doing each and every day in the classroom, as well as for Keystone exams. So the way we've aligned our curriculum is so that it's preparing the students for success. So our goal will be to move away from a lot of these pieces that maybe students are taking home in terms of a PSSA packet, as we continue to do the things that we're doing in our schools to support our teachers and our students.
Thank you. Excellent question. I see a hand back there. I did see two at once, but I'm going to go with ladies first, all right?
Thank you. I have 2 elementary students, and I have a question. So all this testing, I have 2 concerns that are coming out of it for me. One, I can monitor how my children are doing. It's in pieces. It comes home, different pieces. I get the PSSAs mailed to me, but I know the school has a full view. So why as a parent, can't get that full view as well? So I'd like you to address that. And then secondly, it struck me, I found it interesting when you said that the teachers view that data and they assess it. Never has any teacher come to me and said, I've assessed this for your child and this is what your child needs. I've always done it in the back of my head. I see this trend. I'm concerned about it. Can something be done here? And well, we don't have the resources. There is no special education for that. Nothing. It's just something that you're going to have to hire a tutor for or something like that. So we do all this testing. I truly think it's a great idea that then the teacher can say what must be done, but I've never had that experience.
Okay, we had 2 questions there. We need somebody to talk about the accessibility of the results of testing for moms and dads who would like to see that, and then also a little more explanation about the RTII process, for example, or the use of results of testing. So who wants to take the first part of that question?
I can certainly start, Dr. Dietrich, since they're elementary kiddos and students who we'd address at our level. Absolutely, PSSA formats come home. There's the parental view that you've seen, of. Our DIBELS results are also in a storage or a warehouse within the district in our performance tracker database. There are also individual forms that can be shared out with parents 3 times a year during the course of benchmarking. Usually October, February, and May are our 3 data days, which typically as parents, you would know that as our in-service opportunities or the in-service days that are built into our district-wide calendar. And on those days, our staff come together and they take a look at not only the standardized or the more summative types of assessments, but also those benchmark informative assessments that Dr. Dietrich looked at, our curriculum-based assessments. And they are working as grade-level teams with the support of the RTI team within the building, generally comprised of our building principals, our guidance counselors, our reading specialists, and reading support people, as well as at times even our psychologists are working within that process and meeting with grade level groups in order to determine what the needs of the students are and the best instructional strategies to address those needs. That process usually is indicated to parents through the RTII format, at least in our reading language arts area, by which students are tiered for the levels of instruction that they need. So tier 1 instruction, tier 2, and then tier 3 becomes more intensive. The interventions become more on a more frequent basis, and that's again during that 30 minutes of time each day that is usually adjacent to their language arts block. So the district has, in more recent years, within the last 5 years, has phased all of our elementary schools into the response to instruction and intervention process for reading language arts because DIBELS is used as that universal screener. More districts are starting to move to an RTI component in math, but again, That's a slower process because there's the lack of having a universal screener that can serve as that quick probe for what math skills students know and then need to know. But we are working on it. So in terms of the strategic and specific times in our school year where teachers are given time to do that, it's 3 times after our benchmark assessments, and most likely you'll know them as placed on the calendar. We also have professional learning communities or morning meetings, team time set aside at all of our buildings, specifically at the elementary for dealing with data and instruction, the instructional strategies that would be driven out to meet the needs of the students based on the data. Teachers will look at that data, indicate strengths and need areas, and then talk amongst themselves, sometimes look to articles and videos and some of our in-service opportunities within the district to achieve the professional development that they need to change their strategies and the instructional base. And some of the best learning they get is from each other, and witnessing practices within classrooms and sharing that information with each other. Sharing our students and accepting ownership for what they're doing is also something that's discussed very openly in our meetings. Could we do a better job of informing parents? I'm sure, because as much as we try to communicate, there's always that next level that we'd want to communicate. But at any time, during our parent-teacher conferences, both in the fall and again now coming up on March 31st, those are opportunities to seek and to receive information about how well your youngster's doing, as well as with our trimester marking period reports that summarize the data for you and give you indicators. But at any point in the mix, our teachers are more than happy to be able to talk with you and provide you with the evidence. Usually when children change in tier groups, just getting back to another component of your question, information in a letter indicating that your child is changing a tier group based on the data that the teachers have taken a look at and evaluated would be another component of that information and communication out to you as parents.
The other thing I'll just add, Jenna, real quick, is that in reference to accessing benchmark testing scores, we are also having some conversation about whether we can use some technology to make those scores more accessible to parents, and we're considering our options for doing that as well.
To follow up on what Mrs. McHugh was saying at the elementary level in terms of data analysis, we also have a lot of vehicles that are built in at the secondary level as well. We rely heavily on what we call professional learning communities, or PLCs, and that's the time when a group of teachers can get together to review the student data, talk about their practice and what adjustments might need to be made. At the high school, for example, we have rotating PLCs during the school day through a 9th period schedule. So that's really a good opportunity for the teachers to collaborate and discuss student progress and where they're at. A lot of our departments have really taken that one step further. The science department, for example, at the high school has what they call Inquiry Tuesdays, where after school they sit down and one teacher really does a demonstration of something that worked well in class, and they're reviewing the data to see how that is impacting their instruction. In terms of the tiered interventions, we've also started to expand our tiered interventions to the secondary level as well, particularly in the area of reading, just to make sure that our older students who, while they have exposure to the literature in English class, if they are not yet proficient, we need to be giving them the time and to build those skills to get them to that proficiency level.
And I'd like to add to what Jenna was sharing. For our current sixth grade students going into 7th grade, we are being very strategic in terms of students that need that additional support at the middle school level in grade 7. So in both reading and math, as we continue to refine and really to provide the students with what their individual needs are based on what the data is really demonstrating. So really that K-12 articulation, as our kids move from the elementary into our middle schools, we're really working towards refining that. And one of the examples, in addition to the other examples that have already been shared, is our students coming into 7th grade for next year, specifically in the areas of reading and math, where they may be below proficiency. And I just want to recognize our curriculum people and our curriculum supervisors who have really been so active in this process.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take the gentleman's question, and as I'm doing that, I just want to remind those who are watching at home, you can ask questions, and the next question I'm going to take will be from somebody watching at home. But if you need directions on how to send those questions to us, you can go to our website, www.npen.org. It does have the directions on how to access the coveritlive.com and how to do the whole process of getting questions to us if you're watching at home. So I'll hand the mic here to this gentleman, and then we'll go to somebody submitting one online.
Thank you, and I appreciate the districts having a forum on this because, as it's clear from the discussion, assessments have become such an important part of what our kids are doing. I want to return to the stress question. Just a vignette. One of my son's friends said to me one day recently, "I failed the Keystone." His class had taken the algebra Keystone, and I didn't know that you could fail the Keystone. I thought it was an assessment. So the question is, does the district do any training for its staff to, not just to make sure that they're hitting all these goals in assessment, but also in not to create stress? Looking at what my son had in 9th grade, my perception was that it was just a crescendo of get ready for the Keystone, get ready for the Keystone, get enough sleep for the Keystone, review for the Keystone. And I think when the students hear this day after day, week after week, the stress becomes overwhelming for some of them.
Okay, we want to talk about the Keystone and the ability to, quote, fail a Keystone, some of the remediation kinds of things that go in, and then also dealing with stress. Meanwhile, I will be talking to Kyle here about coveritlive.com. But go ahead and take this gentleman's question. Anyone who wants to take it from the panel?
Sure, I'll be happy to start and then pass it to my colleagues. The Keystones are new for the class of 2017, so our current 9th graders are under a lot of stress. I mean, it's new. The state mandated this. We're under obligation to comply. So my hope would be that as we continue to move through from one year to the next, that the stress level will be reduced. But whenever you're doing anything that's brand new and is required for a particular class, there is going to be a certain level of stress that is associated with that. I'm glad to have this increased recognition and awareness of what you're sharing so that we can go and we can be, I know we'll be more cognizant in terms of working with our teachers who are working with our students. The way that the Keystone Proficiency Program works is that a student that does not pass the Keystone exam or is below proficiency for the first time, there is an intervention. We have an intervention plan. I think what we've done in North Penn has been extraordinary. I think we're really have done a great job of really providing supports and outlining what it's going to look like for students as we're moving from 9th to 10th to 11th grade. So, for example, a student that is below proficiency in the Keystone, they're given the opportunity for an intervention. The intervention can take different. They look different based on what the proficiency level was. So a student, for example, last year that was not proficient in a Keystone exam, if they were basic, they were given the opportunity to participate in a summer remediation, and it was a 10-day course, and then they retook the Keystone at the end of that course. If the student was not proficient again, then there's the opportunity for additional remediation, and then students, we've already begun the wave for this year where there's actually 4 waves of Keystone administration. They're administered in December, January, May, and July, August. We determine as a district when the Keystones are going to be administered, and this particular school year is what we're calling a cleanup year, again because the Keystones are new, and we have kids that were in 7th grade that took the Keystone Algebra as a pilot. And so those students, once you pass the Keystone, you don't have to take the Keystone again. It's once and done when you're proficient or above. So as our kids continue to move forward from 9th to 10th to 11th grade, these opportunities for intervention and remediation are going to exist for all students from the class, beginning with the class of 2017. Now we have another option. So let's say the student takes the Keystone exam, they take the intervention, they still are below proficiency in the Keystone exam. We provide additional remediation, and they're below proficiency again. Then the state has created what's called a project-based assessment. Would you like to speak more about the project-based assessment, Dr. Butts?
You know, I just wanted to share, before I get into the project-based assessment, I definitely hear what you're saying regarding the amount of stress that students are currently undergoing with the amount of standardized testing. I have 2 children within the district, a 9th grade student and a senior, and have experienced the whole realm of testing as a parent as well as an educator. So we do recognize the amount of work that we're requiring of students and the amount of performance that we're requiring. Having said that, please know that one of the things that we're really working towards is getting students to be successful when they first take either the Keystone exam or be successful with other standardized tests. Specifically with the Keystone, we are working very diligently to making all of the courses that a student takes prior to a Keystone course aligned to the rigor and level of expectation of that particular exit exam. And again, these Keystone exams, I know that this has been mentioned previously, these are end-of-course assessments. These are state-mandated assessments that students must be proficient in order to get a high school diploma. So we are very, very concerned that we have all of our students be successful. And our hope is that as we move forward, we're able to get everyone to feel really comfortable with their level of knowledge and skills so that when these tests are being taken, that the knowledge that they have learned, what they needed to learn, will help them be successful with that. Having said that, we do know that, for some students that may not be the case, and they may not be successful the first time around with the Keystone exam. Please know, again, our high school staff and our middle school staff are working diligently towards putting in programming that really is targeting their individual student needs and deficits with understanding or content knowledge or skill development. So we really are very much in their corner, so to speak, to have them be successful with this. Our main goal is to get them to have that high school diploma. We know that that's very important for college and career readiness, and please know we've got a staff that really is working hard for those students. As far as the project-based assessments, the state has put into place an alternative pathway for the Keystone exams, and this is something that they've called project-based assessments. When a student has not shown to be proficient in a Keystone content area, they're actually eligible to take the project-based assessment. And the project-based assessment is actually something that is still based upon the academic content of the Keystone exam, but gives them an alternative way to express their knowledge, their skill development, and do it in a manner that is using an online instructional as well as assessment tool. It is done in a setting where there is a teacher there to support them should they need the support. And it is done over a period of time, so they have actually quite a bit of time to be able to work on this project-based assessment. The project-based assessment is done online, as I mentioned before. The state actually develops these online tutorials and assessment. They also will evaluate the final culminating project that results from the project-based assessment. It is our hope that really, if a student isn't successful and demonstrates proficiency in a standardized format, that they're able to show proficiency in this alternative pathway. And really, for them, that may be the pathway that really makes sense. So we're actually looking forward to being able to have all of these interventions, curricula in place to support student success.
And I absolutely hear what you're saying. And I think as we work through implementing this system of student supports, absolutely for all of us, the message that we want conveyed to students is not that you failed, but that you're not there yet, and that we're here to help you get there.
Okay, thank you. And again, I want to underscore the need, as Dr. Butts had mentioned, the need to feel confident. As I mentioned earlier, your students should be able to look at a list of expectations. They should see what is on the Algebra 1 Keystone. It's very, very apparent. They've told us the following state standards will be measured on the Algebra 1 Keystone exam. Your students should be able to go through and say, yep, I can do that one. Ooh, I can do that one. Yes, I can do that one. Ooh, this one I'm not so sure about. I think I need a little more help on that before I feel confident that I'm ready to sit for a statewide exam on it. And go through that whole list of expectations and be able to say, yes, I am ready, bring it on. And that's a good feeling when you've arrived at that point. Mr. Berger, we have lots of people, I'm told, are sending us questions, so give us one.
All right, our first question comes to us from Donna out in the community, and this kind of follows up on an earlier question from the audience. Realizing that some of these testing days that are being given are listed on the website at npen.org, she says there are many more elementary school tests that are not listed on this site. Is there a way to maybe put a monthly calendar of all of these tests at the elementary level so parents can understand and know when these are going to be happening?
Okay, Dr. Halban, Mrs. McHugh, anybody else want to tackle that one? Elementary testing.
I would say district-wide, we do develop both an elementary and a secondary district-wide assessment calendar. We can certainly consider that as an option. I think in general, the benchmark assessments are generally given in the ballpark of October, January, and May. One of the challenges with putting that up on the web is the understanding that when we list a test window, that is the window in which the assessment must be given. It does not mean a child's being assessed every day of that window. So for instance, for Dibbles, we might give a 3-week testing window to give the building the flexibility of administering the assessment at a time that is convenient for the school and fits in with the rest of the school program. It doesn't mean children are taking a Dibbles assessment for 3 weeks. So we can certainly consider that, and also maybe consider putting a description of the assessments and the amount of time that each assessment takes so that parents have an accurate picture of how much time is actually being spent on assessment.
Okay, Kyle, let's have another one, then I'll go back to our audience, and then we'll come back to you.
I'm going to combine two questions here because they deal with the topic of PVAS, the Pennsylvania Value Added Assessment System. Question from Chrissy is, how much growth should my child make on PVAS? And then another question from Sharisha, if I'm saying that correctly. Is there a way that parents could view the data of PVAS of their own children?
Okay, let's take a stab at that one. We're going to talk about growth, a year's of growth, more than a year's growth, that whole thing, the challenge that we have with that, and who wants that one?
I'll take it.
Sure.
When we look at PVAS or any growth-based measure, Dibbles can also measure growth. The grade assessment can also measure growth. The mantra that we have is we're looking for, at a minimum, a year's growth in a year's time for all students, regardless of their starting place. So, for instance, unlike, if you're not familiar with that growth mindset, when we talk about kids being proficient, really what we're saying is at the same time of year, no matter where your starting point was in terms of achievement, you all need to be at least here or higher, okay? Some kids are very close to that mark or over it already at the beginning of the year. Some kids are starting very far away from that mark. When we look at growth, what we're saying instead is, how much more do you know at the end of the year than you did at the beginning of the year? And so what we're looking for is a year's growth in a year's time for all students, regardless of where that starting point is. For students who are starting below proficient, we would actually like to see more than a year's growth in a year's time. Because if the student makes more than a year's growth in a year's time, the student will be closing that gap between their achievement and the achievement of their age peers. And that is obviously what we would like to see when we provide remediation and intervention opportunities, is the student catching up with their peers. And I'm sorry, Kyle, the second part of that question was, accessing.
Yeah, is there a way for parents to see it?
And unfortunately, the state does not provide us, they don't send us PVAS reports to send home the way they do with PSSA or with Keystones. However, the PVAS data is all on a web system and can be accessed by school staff. If you're interested in seeing your child's PVAS score, at this point, I would suggest that you contact your child's teacher, and that would be the best route for gaining access to that information.
Okay. At least a year's worth of growth in a year's time. Even more is wonderful.
Most of the conversation here is taking place is being proficient. And I think if you really look at the education right now, and if you really talk to lots of parents, most of the parents feel like that most of the efforts are being spent for 10 percentile, which is achievers, and most of the people who is not proficient. Unfortunately, the 80% of the people, 80% of the kids follow within that parameter. And I think we are not spending time on those 80%, and we are spending most of the time on a 10 percentile or the bottom 10 percentile. Why are we not putting more efforts on the 80% and worrying about the top 10 or the bottom 10?
Okay, the student in the middle. Let's talk about our efforts to help students across the entire spectrum of needs. Jenna?
I think in terms of, I'm in the special education realm, and some of the things that we're doing with special education in terms of looking at inclusive practices and merging our resources really so that we don't have that students in the middle whose needs aren't being addressed. So when I say inclusive practices, we're looking at educating our students who have disabilities in the regular ed environment. And with that comes a benefit for all students because it means that the teachers and the resources are also following them. So we're also looking at things like RTII where we're not labeling students based on you have an IEP, therefore you get this, you're a regular ed kid, therefore you get this. We're really looking at it based on need and trying to allocate those resources based on need rather than by a label.
I think it's interesting that you indicate 80% of the students because when we look at our RTI numbers, the general parameter where we want all of our students is that 80% of our students are functioning in Tier 1 or the core concepts that we're teaching. And then 15% of our students we expect, if they fall out nationally in a standard way, to be at a Tier 2 level of intervention where we're providing them with even more supports, as you've indicated. And then about 5% of our students falling in that Tier 3, which is truly intensive instruction and hits upon some of the things that Ms. Rufo just indicated for more intense and frequent interventions. What we find happening is many of our students are at that 80%, as you've indicated, and our staff within that Tier 1 intervention, as well as across the board when they're teaching their core curriculum, is to begin to differentiate and to begin to look at individualizing the instruction. Because as Dr. Holben said, it isn't about just maintaining that expectation of curriculum at the grade level, but making sure that all kids, irregardless of their starting point, are making a year's worth of growth. So no longer are we able to just, as you've indicated, address the specific needs of our students who are at that 10% or our students who might need a little bit more time to learn things. So we are working, our staff has been very diligent in learning how to differentiate, how to identify the strengths of our students as well as their individual needs, and then tailoring the instruction to meet that. And I know we've said that several times this evening, but that's been the focus of the way that we, along with many other districts across the Commonwealth, have had to change and address the instruction in order to meet the accountability marks that we're being measured by. So we are looking at differentiating our instruction. We are experiencing, especially at the elementary level, a great deal of pre-testing students, checking and identifying their prior knowledge coming into a skill set or into a specific chapter or unit, whether it's in social studies, science with a very exploratory and hands-on KIT program, looking at our math, and then looking at reading language arts. So we are truly taking a look at where students' starting point is and then building upon that by flexibly grouping students within the core of instruction. And I think that's even spreading and continuing on to high school with some of the core structures that are in place to meet needs of students, irregardless of where they find themselves in terms of their ability level and their achievement scores. So hopefully that helps.
I think it also ties into the first question we had this evening from Mr. O'Donnell regarding e-learning. We're seeing more of a migration towards the concept of grouping students and having students in a blended environment where some of them are working directly with the teacher while some others are working on computerized programs which will challenge that individual student. So we don't want to stress students, but it would be a shame if students come home and say, when they're asked, what did you learn today? Nothing. We don't want that to be the answer. We want them to feel like they've been challenged appropriately during the course of their instruction, and for them, a lot of times, as we're seeing now this migration, it can involve some computer-assisted instruction also. Okay, Mr. Berger, another question.
Okay, we have several. Here's one from Cheryl. She asks, can my son opt out of these assessments, or is there an alternative version that he can take?
If the reference is to PSSA and Keystone assessments, the only opt-out that the state allows is opting out for religious reasons. And there is, for a religious objection to the content of the assessment, there is a process that the state gives us for evaluating and addressing those requests. What parents need to know, however, in reference to the Keystone's exams, is that even though a parent may request an opt-out for the actual exam, there is no opt-out for the project-based assessment. So, and that is as per the Chapter 4 regulations from the state. So even if a parent wishes for their child not to take the Keystone and submits a request to have a religious objection honored, the child will still need to complete the project-based assessment in order to earn a diploma.
Okay, Mr. Berger, another question.
This question comes to us from Sarah. She asks, how are special needs students handled with these tests? Are they given accommodations? Are they exempt, et cetera?
Okay, Dr. Santoro?
Well, one of the things that we always look at is the IEP team, and through the IEP team is where we make those decisions. So if students are taking the PSSA, if they're taking the Keystone, then the team decides what accommodations the student would need in order to take that assessment. We also have students that may take an alternative assessment, and that is also decided through the IEP team. So everything is very individualized.
Okay, we'll have one more, and then I'll open it back up to those that are present this evening. If not, we'll come back to you, Mr. Berger. So keep the questions coming.
All right, this question comes to us from Matthew asking, what are the assessments for specialized subjects like art, music, phys ed, and so on?
We really don't have state.
As far as standardized state assessments, there are currently no assessments that directly aligned to art, music. I apologize, Kyle, what was the list of subjects?
I believe the subjects listed here were art, music, and phys ed.
There are no state standardized assessments for those particular standards in art, music, and phys ed. However, we do have a Chapter 4 requirement that says that we address those content areas within our school program, and we do that. Those content areas do have curriculum-based assessments. So within each of those areas, art, music, and PE, teachers in the districts have developed either midterms or final exams, maybe not for PE. PE has different types of assessments, not a handwritten, paper pencil assessment. And the other content areas may not also have a paper pencil assessment that we traditionally think of as a test, but they have other types of performance measures that they have instituted within their curriculum. So no to the state standardized tests, yes to the curriculum-based district assessments.
Okay, other questions from members in the audience? Yes.
So we've heard a lot tonight about getting feedback, in terms of how our students are doing. And I know Dr. Holman and I, we've had this conversation as well. And it sounds like in terms of the essential content, we're doing that to get that feedback loop. And it sounds like we're looking at it from a standardized testing, how we can provide that. But on a day-to-day basis, especially at the higher grades where there's not those parent-teacher conferences, how are we looking to support that?
In terms of the instructional content and the essential, the standards that you heard Dr. Dietrich share about in the presentation, that target is actually targeted towards the secondary schools. So that as teachers are creating their unit assessments and as we're writing curriculum to align with our PA core standards, we're being very intentional to be sure that they're aligned to the standards, and then the assessments that the teachers are preparing are also aligned to the standards as well. So as there's a unit assessment that's administered, then the teacher has the opportunity at the end of the, after they administer the assessment, they analyze the student data, they provide the intervention for any learning gaps that exist, and that's where those remediation opportunities become available for students in the secondary schools, especially in the high school. So that process continues in terms of this instructional sequence until the student has mastered the essential content, which is aligned to standards. So we are strategic at the secondary level in terms of, and we continue to find ways to be more strategic because it's always a journey, and to identify the student learning needs and to really close those gaps. And one of the other things that we do at the high school that I wanted to, and it's been mentioned in several of what you've heard in terms of professional learning communities, and now I'm finding myself thinking about keystones again, is our teachers at the high school are immersed in these professional learning communities, as you heard earlier from Jenna. And we specifically have teachers doing a lot of collaboration in our school improvement team meeting when we're talking about best practices, and not just in keystones, but across all subjects. So what those conversations look like is that teachers across all subjects are having the opportunity to talk about what it is that they're doing in their subject area, what are the best practices that are working, and that way we can learn from one another. And being, again, very intentional in terms of that. Well, we also have PLCs that are strategic for keystones alone. So we have different levels of remediation and intervention across all subjects, both keystone-related, non-keystone-related, and other just core courses, as we really are working with students to have them really try to do. We want them to achieve at their full potential. And that's what all our goals are.
Also, somebody expand on the parent portal as a way to get information to parents, email, that sort of thing. Jenna, Tony? Somebody?
Sure, I'm happy to respond to that, because what we did at the secondary level for this current school year is that the hack is the interim reports are done electronically. And actually for next year, for all secondary schools, all of our report cards and our interims are going to be done electronically. But parents have the opportunity to go into our home access center to see how their students are performing. And it gives them the opportunity to see what are the assignments that they're missing, what are the assessments to date. So it's a great parent communication tool. Did you want to?
No, the only other thing I was going to add is, as I said earlier, we are also exploring whether or not we can make benchmark assessment scores available through the Home Access Center as well, so that parents go to the same place to get that information.
Okay, and of course, always email your teachers if you have questions. Teachers are very pleased to know that parents are taking an interest in their child's education, and you can email teachers with questions about the progress of your child and the progress towards mastery of essential content. Mr. Berger, let's take another question from someone at home.
Okay, we're going to combine about 3 questions here. It's a nice segue into teacher-based questions here, which is what this will involve. First, these questions are from Donna and Lydia, and Donna wants to know what's being done to encourage and reward teachers teaching classroom material in their own creative manner. Teaching to the test and being reviewed based on how material is being taught seems to be restricting some of our teachers who really know how to engage with kids. And piggybacking that question, how are teachers and principals evaluated each year? Who contributes to the review? How are they assessed?
Very timely question, and which panel member wants to explain the new teacher rating systems and everything that's happening at the state level?
I can speak to the Supervision Evaluation Plan and Act 82, which is educator effectiveness. So for this current school year, how our teachers are being evaluated in the state of Pennsylvania is, according to 85% of a teacher's evaluation, is what's called the 4 domains, the framework for teaching, which is the work of Charlotte Danielson. And our teachers, as they're preparing their lesson plans, as we have teachers involved in professional development opportunities, we are continuing to find ways to support them, not only this year, but actually as we're looking at our professional development calendar for next year. So the other 15% of a teacher's evaluation is what we call the school performance profile, which you may have heard in other venues at school board meetings, as I know Dr. Holman has been sharing out that information. Every teacher in the building receives a percentage for school performance profile for this particular school year. For our classroom teachers, it's 15%. And school performance profile is a compilation of a lot of different data.
Yeah, it is. It replaced the old AYP system. If you remember that old adequate yearly progress system that we used to have, where we had targets every year for percent proficient on PSSA, and if the school didn't make those targets, then you went into levels like warning and school improvement and that sort of thing. The state got rid of that system and replaced it with the school performance profile. That score structure calculates a score out of 100 to apply to each school in the state of Pennsylvania. It encompasses a much broader range of data than the AYP system did, because in addition to percent proficient for reading and math, it looks at all 4 tested subjects: reading, math, science, and I almost said social studies, writing. And it looks not just at the percent proficient, but also at that growth factor, and really weights them equally. The old system did not weight growth into the calculation at all. In addition, there are some other data sets like attendance rate, graduation rate at the high school level, looking at how many students take the PSAT, how many students take AP exams, and so forth, that all factor into that calculation. And as Dr. McKay said, that school performance profile score is now going to, starting with this year, count as part of both the teacher evaluation and, beginning next year, part of the principal evaluation as well.
So in addition to the teachers' planning and preparation, their instruction, their classroom environment, their attending to professional responsibilities, which would all be a part of the Charlotte Danielson 4 domains, we're also seeing some progression in the way the formulas are written in educator effectiveness. So you want to just expand what's happening down the road beyond this year? Deb or Diane or any of you?
Sure, I can start, and then if anybody else wants to contribute to the conversation. For next year, we have our educational specialists. And I always have to look on my list to make sure that I remember who all the pieces are. It's our home and school visitors, it's our psychologist, our OT/PT vision, any of our counselors, anybody that's not directly responsible for direct instruction in the classroom. So what happens for next year is that the folks that are in this educational specialist are going to be evaluated using a different framework, and I believe I know it's 80% for, I'm struggling to remember all the specific pieces for the educational specialist, but that training is going to be happening actually on Wednesday for all of our principals and our administrative staff. We have somebody coming in from the IU that will be supporting us in this process. Our principal evaluation system also begins for next year. And over the last 5 years or so, the state of Pennsylvania has been very strategic in terms of principal training, in terms of what we call principal-inspired leadership. And as principals over the last several years have gone into the role of a principalship for the first time, or an assistant principalship, they've been required to take these courses. And this principal's evaluation system is directly linked to all of the instruction, and that has been assembled over the course of the last several years as our principals work with their teachers to provide a climate and a culture that is conducive to a student achievement, that they're looking for providing a vision, professional development needs, knowing the needs of their teachers and their students. And there's a correlation between the teacher evaluation system and the principal evaluation system that we're going to be working with our principals actually over the summer as we introduce the various components. We've started to introduce some of the components to the principal evaluation, but that's going to be one of our key components moving forward over the next couple of months as well.
Go ahead. And if I could just jump back, I think another portion of the question, Mr. Berger, was really in terms of celebrating and encouraging our teachers and their creativity and their opportunity to interpret the standards as well as our curriculum and our resources. And that's something that we really do pride our teachers in doing, in terms of the curriculum and the standards are pretty set for them, and that's consistent across 13 elementaries. It's consistent across 3 middle schools and then across the departments and the content areas of the high school. Beyond that, however, is their ability and their opportunity to marry their knowledge of the curriculum and the PA core standards with their knowledge of the students. And that's key, because there's nothing more important than what happens between students and teachers in a classroom. The heart of that learning comes from marrying the knowledge of the content with the knowledge of your students, and then being able to pull from the many resources that North Penn and our curriculum department has provided to the teachers to be able to then identify strategies and activities that will be both exciting and engaging, participatory in our classrooms. We've witnessed wax museums at the elementary school that takes content and puts it into students verbalizing and vocalizing through a period of history. We witnessed virtual trips using technology and connecting with authors from around the world to our really very close proximity and hands-on field trips that our students attend at all levels, K-12. So we really do have to pride our teachers on always looking for the next best thing and that most creative, innovative way to engage students and make their learning both fun and meaningful as we strive to make success and progress towards the standards and the curricula that we're prescribed to be teaching at the state level. But again, a multitude of resources really allows our teachers to have some academic freedom and marry their knowledge of the content with the knowledge of their students.
The other piece I just want to touch on relative to the evaluation system is that, as Dr. McKay mentioned, this year the teacher evaluation is 85%, the observation and the rating on the 4 domains that Dr. Dietrich mentioned, and 15% the school performance profile, for both teachers and principals. As those systems roll out, the balance will eventually become 50% of the evaluation on the 4 domains, 50% of the evaluation based on various student data sets. The school performance profile is the only one that's included at the moment, but ultimately there will be PVAS data included in that evaluation. There will also be what are called student learning objectives included in that evaluation. And what that's going to require teachers to do is to write a measurable objective for their students that they are seeing that year in terms of what achievement they would like to see them to see in a particular area of the curriculum. And then over the course of the year, implement strategies that will help the students get to that objective. And at the end of the year, look at the percent of students, or however the measurement is stated, look at whether that objective has been achieved. All those parts to the evaluation system are defined by the state, and they are in the process of giving us guidance as to how to implement some pieces of that evaluation system.
So it's a very complex topic. Certainly you can go and in your search engine put in educator effectiveness for Pennsylvania. You can call up the details on the Pennsylvania Department of Education's website. But as was mentioned, there is a movement here where you will see more of the percentage of the teacher's evaluation be specifically tied to the test scores and to the achievement of the specific learning objectives. And as was mentioned, you will see correlation between what the principal rated the teacher as and what actually is occurring on those state tests as a part of principal evaluations. And that's all a part of this whole accountability movement that is sweeping across our entire country. Nevertheless, we do want to, as Mrs. McHugh had mentioned, still value our teachers and the art of teaching and how they're able to connect with our students. A lot of times that does come out in the 4 domains, as I mentioned earlier, the planning and preparation, the actual instruction, the classroom environment, and the professional responsibilities. Mr. Berger, I'll take another one, and then I'll go back to our audience who's present.
All right, this question comes to us from Emma. Can the district look into giving above grade level benchmarks for gifted students who may score advanced on the grade level benchmark on the first administration of the school year?
Well, I think that's something, that's been out there a lot in our schools, talking about these benchmarks that we're giving. And we do, once again, because we make these decisions based on the GIEP team, where we have also talked with the team to see if students, because they're scoring so high, if there's the possibility that they can take the next year's assessment. So once again, these are all conversations that we can have at the school level. They seem to be very individualized. We don't want to set out just a blanket statement to say, you know, yes, we're going to move forward, but it's something that we do take under consideration. So I would really defer that back to the schools and based on the individual students.
The other thing I would just like to comment on with that is, again, when we think about proficiency versus growth, the fact that a child has scored advanced does not mean the child has topped out the test and grown as much as they can on that test. So as Dr. Santoro said, that's the kind of conversation that has to happen at the GIEP team meeting so that we can see, does that student still have room to grow on that assessment, or has that student truly topped out that assessment and the assessment can no longer show the growth that the child's making?
Okay, we are down to only a few minutes left. Are there any questions from those who are present in the audience? If not, I will go back to Mr. Berger for an additional question or two from those watching at home. Okay, Mr. Berger.
All right,
Next
this question comes to us from Bob, a little preamble to the question, saying that he understands the state and federal accountability that is now being imposed on all school districts in Pennsylvania. He believes as a student or parent it would be beneficial if at the start of the school year or at the end of the previous school year, a matrix be sent to students' parents that details what curriculum or requirements are expected to be mastered for the upcoming school year. He's requesting I guess basically a syllabus for the students the next year of coursework, and this way students would have an opportunity to prepare properly and in a timely manner, while at the same time it will benefit all the parties involved in the educational process. So would that be a possibility?
I think that actually is a very good suggestion. Please know that when we talk about accountability as far as the state is concerned, the items or the content that they're being assessed on state assessments is actually available to the public. These documents from the state are called anchors and eligible content documents. What these documents articulate are the specific skills that students are supposed to master on these assessments. These are already readily available to parents on the Pennsylvania Department of Education's accountability and assessment websites, as well as the standards aligned system. Both websites are actually linked to our own North Penn website, or you can Google those two websites. We can actually provide those links to the anchors and eligible content for parents, as well as the Keystone anchors and eligible content. So that is something that would be easily available for parents, and actually is available at this time through the state.
Okay, Mr. Berger, we have time for one more question.
All right, this one is in the realm of elementary, so Dr. McHugh, stand by. This comes from Jenny. How can I help my first grade student ready herself for standardized assessments?
That's a very good question, and one in which we begin to address by kind of back mapping the skills that are necessary, since our first level of more formalized standardized testing, at least the state level, is by third grade. But if we consider our DIBELS assessments and some of the other standardized assessments given, I think by reviewing and reinforcing the skills and the paperwork that's coming home with your child on a nightly basis, we always stress to all parents to read with your children, have them read to you, have you read to them. And that's building some of those high-intensity literacy skills, which in the primary grades, you're going to see a lot of assessments coming home on literacy skills, and we're teaching them to read. So that's one of the greatest benefits. Working with your child on everyday activities, if you are, for a first grader, if you're in the store, talking to the child, being very verbal, walking through what it is you're doing in a store, the lists of things, the items, the building the vocabulary, the background experiences. When you're in the car, we have vocabulary car games that can be played, almost utilizing any type of activity that you do as a family, making it fun and making it be game-like is really high potential for readying your child for the literacy skills, the math skills that they're going to see on any type of assessment. But in a district and in a purposeful way, we do back map the skills, and we build foundationally from kindergarten through first grade, second grade, on to third grade, preparing them for that high intensity and high accountability PSSA that they see for the very first time in third grade, which, by the way, our district scores are very strong with. But again, just reviewing and being in contact with your child's teacher to be able to reinforce the skills that are being learned in school is a really appropriate way to ready your child for those kinds of tests. And I would defer to anyone else with other ideas as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on that one as well. Being a former principal for 16 years, one of the things that I always encourage parents that when you go to a parent-teacher conference, to be prepared, come in with your questions, ask how's my child performing, let me see the data, let me see evidence. I always encourage teachers to have work samples there so parents could see throughout the year the progression that their child was making, and then tie everything back to the standards and to the core. So I value parent-teacher conferences, and I think that if you go in and you have those meaningful conversations, you should really be keeping on track so that when your child does have to take a standardized test, you can see how your child is ready and will be able to be successful.
Okay, with that, I do want to thank our panel members. I appreciate the thoughtful responses that you gave to all the questions. I do want to thank all of those who attended this evening for your questions and for your attention to this. Also want to thank those who are watching at home and sending us questions via coveritlive.com. I appreciate your interest in your child's education and the topic of assessment. If you would like to continue the conversation, and I encourage you to do so, please, we do have some opportunities for you. The superintendent's community conversation is one vehicle. I have those community conversations at different times of the day and evening. The next two that are coming up happen to be over the lunchtime hour. The next one will be on March 20th at the Montgomery Township Building, March 20th from 12:30 to 1:30. Likewise, another opportunity on April 8th from 12:30 to 1:30 at the ESC, at the central office. So 2 opportunities to come and have additional discussion directly with me. If you'd like to have some more discussion this evening, I'm sure our panel members will be sticking around for a few minutes. I'll be available also up front. Thank you so much for your time.